Welcome to the Education Insights Focus on Behavior podcast. We're here to talk about all things behavior in the world of education. We take the science of behavior and break it down for educators into easily implementable steps, and we're excited to spend some time with you. Get ready to talk through behavior, what works, what doesn't work, and how we can all improve our work in schools so we as educators can be more fulfilled and our students can be more successful.
Hello and welcome to Education Insights Focus on Behavior. I'm your host, Dr. Selena Layden, and as always, I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Daniel Irwin. Hi, Daniel.
Hello.
And Dr. Daria Lorio Barston. Hi, Daria.
Hi, everyone.
And we are so thankful to always be joined by our producer, Emily Muse. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
So we're going to start today. This is kind of the beginning of the school year. You may already be into your year or getting ready to start receiving our favorite students again. And so we thought we would talk a little bit today about how we manage our own behavior. Sometimes we get that feeling of anxiety, nervousness, just a lot going on around us. And so, what are some things that we can do to kind of calm that within ourselves? So, Daria, Daniel, what do you do to bring yourself back to a regular equilibrium place?
So, Selena, I have my hot tip, and everybody who knows me will now forever be suspicious of my own behavior. But I generally carry a vessel of water or tea or something like that with me. And when I feel my emotions really hyperextend, then I do take a couple of long sips of water or tea or whatever, because that gives me that pause between kind of my reaction to actually choosing how I want to respond to a situation. And I really love this tip because one, it helps me stay hydrated, so nice bonus. And two, it's incompatible behavior with my sass coming out. So that's my hot trick. People are welcome to take it if they would like to. But I also do have a disclaimer that if you see me in real life and if I'm talking to you and I'm taking a sip of water, it really might be that I'm just thirsty.
For the listeners, Daria's taking a sip right now. Um, just so you know what's happening in real time. Uh, I think one of my things that helps me a lot, and it's similar to kind of what Daria said, is just having something else to do. So generally you could write something down or straighten something up or um, kind of whatever's around. Physical movement helps me. The other part of how I try to help myself when I'm having a moment of where I feel like things are getting to where I don't want them to be is to name what that thing is. Um, and generally I have like a really just silly name for it, like my nerves are jangling. And if I just say that in my head, it's so silly and ridiculous that it like help like, and that's what it feels like physically. It feels like my nerves are jangling. But it just helps bring that down a little bit because it's sort of a silly name for what I'm feeling, and generally it's not that serious. Um, but I also tell my wife that sometimes, yeah, at home. I'll say my nerves are jangling. I'm just letting you know the ice machine, whatever it is. I'm jangling, and even saying it out loud helps bring it down a little bit.
Selena, what about you?
So, I mean, this isn't like rocket science, but I'm a big fan of just the breathing, right? Like sometimes I just need to take a deep breath, and I think it kind of serves a similar purpose that you're drinking the water or whatever it does. It forces me to take half a second to collect myself before the reaction comes out. I remember when my kids were really little, especially if we were like trying to get out the door really fast, and you know how like in the mornings you're super rushed and everything is kind of frazzled, jangling. I don't know. I haven't ever used that word before, but it would be my head. But you know, you have that frazzled feeling of like, okay, we have to get out the door. And I would put the kids in the car, you know, they're in their car seats and all of that, and like shut the doors. And I always put the one on the passenger side in last because he was the older one. And so like I'd put him in and shut the door, and then like the walk around the car back to my side of the car, taking a breath and being like, okay. That was kind of my moment of zen that I would take. But yeah, I do think just taking a breath or two and then moving into whatever we need to do next, is kind of how I do it.
To Daria's point too, like I think hydration has so much to do with the jangles. Um, and just sort of any feeling of water's generally the answer, at least a good start.
Well, I think, like I said, I think it does cause you to take a moment. I also imagine, like, especially if it's something that I don't know how many drinks you're taking, Daria, but if you find that like you do it once and it doesn't solve it, like I wonder if it kind of also leads to like what else, like, am I hungry? Do I need to sleep? Like, does it start to lead to some of those other thoughts about what could also be causing your heightened mood, and not that it's always an external thing, but I also, like, I know if I haven't slept enough, if I'm really hungry, if I like, those things definitely impact my reaction to the world around me.
I mean, I think that's definitely true, right? I think for all of us, the setting events have a tendency to really impact how we interact with the world. I think the important piece and the kind of commonality in our responses reminds me of that quote by Viktor Frankl about that there's a space between a stimulus and response, right? And having that pause in between is what gives us an opportunity to actively choose how we want to respond to a situation and make sure that's aligned to how we define ourselves and what our values are, as opposed to kind of falling into that trap that I think as humans we very frequently fall into, in just reacting to a situation without having taken that pause. So, I think that's whatever your strategy is, right? And I would be very curious about all of our listeners' hot tips and tricks and what they use to help themselves kind of self regulate in that space. But I think whatever it is, as long as we are expanding that space between that stimulus and our response, I think that's probably an effective strategy.
Yeah, so this actually takes us into our topic for the day. So our title of today's episode is Your Own Behavior: Monitoring, Managing, Maintaining. So, I mean, we've talked about some strategies about why or how we kind of monitor and manage our own behavior, but why is this an important thing to think about, particularly as the school year is beginning?
Ooh, me, Daniel. Let me
I
take a
wanted to
stab
go
at it
first.
first. No, okay, you can. But so really, I think it is so important for us as adults to recognize that we really do set the tone in our classrooms, right? And I think that realistically, there is some great research in as far as the quality of research, not necessarily what the results are telling us, but what we know is that particularly at this point of time, our students have a hard time self-regulating frequently, and that we are struggling across kind of the ages and the classroom types and all of those things for kiddos to manage their own behaviors and their own emotions. And so a lot of times, not only do we set the tone by modeling, but our students are counting us to co-regulate together as opposed to being able to access their own self-regulation skills. Like they need that scaffold as a support between the two. So I think that, our emotions and the way we present have a tendency to be contagious to those around us, particularly when those around us are looking for us to be the authority figure, the instructional leader, or just kind of looking for us to set that tone in our spaces, in our classrooms, and in our schools.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that it doesn't matter if those children are 2, 5, 10, 15, or 18, right? Like I think this really does go across the pre-K 12 spectrum. I think when kids are very young and they don't have a lot of those regulation skills, they really do need those skills modeled. And to your point, co-regulated, the calmer you are, the calmer they're going to be. But I think even as teenagers, when we still don't have fully formed executive functioning skills, seeing those things modeled and seeing how adults can make rational, good decisions around their own behavior is only going to benefit the students that we support.
Yeah, and I think kind of along those same lines is as a classroom teacher or someone in a school building, there's always sort of this kind of leadership opportunity, and leaders create an environment, and that environment helps shape behavior. And the more, as you were kind of saying, Selena, the more we can not only kind of engage in those strategies, but also talk about how we're using them, right? And to be kind of explicit around, especially as kids are getting older, like, this is really frustrating. This is how I am doing this, and it's working for me, because giving them that language, giving them, because if you don't see it, you don't see it, right? We do so many of these things internally. Taking a sip of water is, you can see it happening, but you don't know why it's happening. Me saying I've got the jangles, it's internal, but it's making me laugh a little bit and it calms me down. So just being able to kind of say the thing that you're doing in the moment, I think can help a lot.
Yeah, and I think that this can start with really simple things, right? If you're not ready to step out and say, let me verbally walk you through my entire self-regulation strategy, even how we speak to students, how we don't interrupt students when they're talking, so that we can say things like, I didn't interrupt you when you were talking. Let me finish and then you can talk. Those simple behavioral models really do stick with kids. And kids notice when you're hypocritical about them. So, for example, if every time a kid is talking, you interrupt them, guess what? They're going to interrupt you. And then when you call them on it, they're going to say, but you did it to me too. So thinking about even those kind of simple behaviors that you can set, and then taking just like a really easy first step of like, it's getting really loud in the classroom. I need a moment for us to have more quiet so I can get my thoughts together. So that students can start to see how you're thinking through that. And I think that that's a really great, just a really great teaching strategy. And it's a really helpful thing for our students to your point, to see an adult work through.
So I think the other piece to that, Selena, is the underlying idea of having trust and having a caring relationship, right? And building those relationships in the classroom. Because to your point, if our students don't see us as respecting them, as modeling self regulation, it's going to be really hard for us to teach them the things that we can't do ourselves, right? And at the same time, as students are trying to figure out what their strategies may be, because this is one of the places where I think that self-regulation skills to be effective are really individualized, right? What works for you may not work for me or Daniel or Emily or, everybody else. So I think
And
it's
just to
important.
interrupt you for 1 second, not only individualized, but contextual. Like how I
So
calm down in some situations is not how I calm down in other situations. So just to put that out there too.
So this is a perfect way to model, right? As say what, do what we say, not to interrupt, she says. I joke. But yeah, and I think that where I was getting to is that definition that we have of what co-regulation is and what self-regulation is. And part of that is it has to happen in the context of a caring relationship between adults and between the students. So I think these two things go hand in hand as far as having the strategies that we are able to do, having the strategies that we can model, that we can actually do think aloud, right? So that our students are beginning to be able to piece together all those components. I mean, it's just like anything with explicit teaching, right? Like I do, we do, you do. And so I think the other piece of that is those fostering those relationships.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's kind of, we've talked before about how you build the climate in your class. And not to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but I think when you start doing these things from the beginning, then that's part of the climate of your class, right? And so students are going to expect to hear you talk about how you are processing your emotions, how you're kind of processing, your actions and those pieces. So I agree with you. So there's a flip side of this is what happens when students start engaging in interfering behaviors? Because I think for a lot of us, that does heighten everyone's emotions, right? It heightens obviously the student engaging in the interfering behavior, it has heightened emotions. Other students may have heightened emotions about that. And as adults, it is perfectly normal and natural to also feel those heightened emotions. Nobody wants to be in a situation where they feel threatened or feel like they're unsafe or even just uncomfortable. And so what are some things that we should think about in those kinds of situations?
There's a couple of different things that I think have helped me in those situations, and it's really thinking about it. It's the ability to say this isn't about me, right? And keeping a focus on safety and keeping a focus on the student, which takes some trial. It takes some error to figure out how to make it not about you a little bit, because sometimes you could be the antecedent, right? Something you've done. But I always try to help teachers sort of recognize, okay, let's start breaking this down and thinking it through in a way that's not to help from catastrophizing, from saying, well, now this is broken and now he's kicking and now like the topography conversation, right? Topographal's a word. I said that very confidently. But to sort of steer away from that and start thinking, some of those strategies, like what are those things that are going to help de-escalate? The other is when we've got kids who might engage in behavior or challenging or interfering behavior that's lasting a long time, is to again maintain safety. But I've always encouraged teachers to, and did this myself, look at a clock and every 30 seconds say something to yourself, or depending on the behavior plan, that's when you're either trying to redirect or something like that, but really staying tuned into something that is objective and predictable. Like it's time. It passes at the same rate regardless, but when we're escalated, it feels like it's slowed down, sped up, all at the same time. So kind of helping to regulate by looking at like the actual passes of time, which is something that's not going to change regardless of the behavior.
So I think it's topographical, just to
Topographical.
topographical. So I think, kind of going back to the title of today's episode, I do think this is where monitoring, managing, and maintaining your behavior is important. And I think the first thing, to your point, is taking a step back and identifying how am I feeling right now? If the student is engaging in behavior that is making me uncomfortable for any reason, um, how am I feeling? Am I feeling that heightened sense of urgency or anxiety or whatever it may be? And then making a decision about how to respond to that. So, as we were talking earlier, and I think Daria, your point is really important, that space between the stimulus and the response. You can take half a second and think, how am I going to respond? And for me, this is where I do take the breath. Okay, so the student is throwing a chair, the student is leaving the room. And not that you're going to take 3 seconds to figure this out if they're leaving the room, because you got to follow them, but half a second to just, okay, be calm and move forward. And I really like your point about it's not personal. Even if you engaged in some behavior that acted as an antecedent for the behavior that's now occurring for that student, it doesn't mean that you did it on purpose. It doesn't mean that you were wrong in what you did. It just means that that's what happened. And later, after everything settles down, I do think going back and reflecting on that is really important. But in the moment, beating yourself up about that is not going to change what's going on. Getting angry or upset about what's going on isn't going to change what's going on. And so, how do you kind of take that emotion that you may be feeling and turn it into something productive? And so, like I said, I think monitoring how am I feeling, how am I behaving right now, and then making a conscious decision in how you're going to manage your own behavior in that way.
And Selena, that's a really important part. And I think another small piece of the puzzle that fits with that is taking the time to practice all these strategies that you have to engage in when the stakes are a little bit higher, right? Like we play how we practice. And so I think it's important for all of us, our students and ourselves, to have a bank of things that we can do to help stretch out that pause, right? Because that is the most important thing that we can do to help us pivot from why me, right? Like, why is this happening? Why is it this? To pivot to that place of curiosity of why is that happening? What's the function of this behavior? So that we can remain to be the problem solvers and the adults and support things in the classroom, right? And respond to things without falling into some traps that are going to escalate the behavior further. So that was one of my things. The other thing that I was thinking about as we're talking through this, I think when we respond to our students, I think it's really important to name what's happening with ourselves and to model that. I loved Daniel's My Nerves Are Jangling. I will now be saying this to absolutely everyone around me. But I think it's important to name how we are feeling. And I think it's also important to connect with students before we correct and before we jump into that instructional piece, because I think sometimes it's really helpful for someone who's having a hard time to hear that, oh geez, I see that this is hard, right? Like I see that this is difficult. I see that this is frustrating because I think this ability to kind of make that connection and come from a supportive stance and come from the place of trying to preserve this caring and trusting relationship is a really important thing as well. Because again, when you're dysregulated, it doesn't feel great and it's not going to help anything if you're kind of poked at and prodded at, not, obviously not physically speaking, but just verbally. So I think that's something for us to think about as well.
Yeah, well, I think too, and I want to bring this up really quick. Your point brings us back to that idea of the science of behavior, right? This isn't personal. There is a function. This didn't just happen randomly. And I think sometimes when we can take kind of that analytical approach to things, um, well, of course, being supportive of the student, but in our own head, okay, there's a reason this happened, what's going on, what's going on in my environment, those kinds of pieces. I think it does help, at least it helps me to separate myself more from the emotional part of what's happening right in front of you. Because then I have questions I need to ask. I have things I need to think through that kind of force me back into, okay, this isn't about me right now. This is about what's going on. And, and the reality is whenever there's a crisis behavior, our only job in that moment is to keep everyone safe and stop the crisis. And so how can we do that in the most effective and efficient way? Because your point, Daria, is really important. When students are engaging in these high level interfering behaviors, they're not happy either. Students don't generally wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to throw a desk at my teacher today. I'm going to hit a window. Like, that's not how students work. Generally, that's not how people work. And so we have to keep that in mind and think, okay, they don't want to be here either. What can we do to get all of us through this? And then the teaching part happens.
Right, because when your brain is escalated, right, like you don't have the full functioning of your frontal lobe anyway. So teaching is not going to stick, even if you give the most beautiful lessons. And, Selena, I think a big piece too here is how important our routines are, because I think it's really important for teachers. We generally tend to think about routines like putting up your supplies and label things, but I think we also need to have planned for routines of what happens when we have a situation that requires some more support with co-regulation or self-regulation, right? Like, what's my personal routine to bring myself a little bit to a more leveled place? What is my routine if I have a student who is really showing me that they require a support at this moment? What is my routine for all the other students? Because I think these are the things that the more we think through and the more we kind of practice them, the more these things are going to become second nature and don't require as much of a cognitive load for us to think about, like, oh, what do I do in this, right? Like, the less we're likely to get flustered and the less our nerves are likely to jangle all over the place. And so I think all of the things that we've talked about is really, really important because for all of us, right, it comes down to the science of the behavior. But I think this is one of the places where we need to use the science of behavior and remember kind of that gentle approach to supporting folks through something that they are still learning, and to almost bring us full circle to the earlier point, whether the kid is 2 or 5 or 15 or 18, right? With regulation, we assume that there comes a certain point of time and age when kids should have all the self-regulation skills. But realistically, they're gradually picking up those things, sometimes at a faster rate, sometimes at a slower rate. But even in adolescence, they look, like self-regulation wise, it's about 50% or something around that, that they're still counting on us to help them co-regulate with them. So I think it's an important piece to remember that just like any other skill, our students are learning this as we go. And it starts with us, right? It starts with us monitoring and managing this and making sure we continue to reflect and fine tune our own practice, particularly when we too get frustrated at times.
And I think kind of along those same lines and coming back to what was said earlier, thinking about naming things and naming them to tame them, right? Name it, tame it. Um, but those ongoing, when things are going well, let's also name those things and just build that into the way the day operates. So whether it's in the middle of an activity, whether it's, just checking in and making sure the kids have the language, and making sure that, and I think this is probably increasingly important in middle and high school, that there's ways, one, that we have built that in to how we're checking in, how we're talking about how we're doing in the class, but also sort of this idea that there's ways to get what you need that aren't public, right? So how are we building it in when we know kids have a need for some sort of regulation? How are we giving them the tools that give them the communication, the strategy, the signal that I need something, or the permission to do something to help them kind of self-regulate? So if it is getting up and standing in the back of the classroom, that's going to help a kid de-escalate. In middle school, I don't necessarily want him or her to have to raise their hand and say, I'm feeling jangled. May I please go stand in the back of the classroom, right? So as you start to see those things, how do we sort of give them the language and the permission to do them and sort of set the expectations about what those look like? And I think sometimes, and I've had this conversation with teachers, is, well, they're going to take advantage of it, right? They're going to take advantage of being able to go stand in the hallway. They're going to take advantage of, putting a break card on their desk to help them sort of delay the work or whatever it is. Which is maybe true, but also that can be such a valuable and strong learning experience that they're learning that this tool has meaning, and now we can capture that and support and continue with the teaching and fade that out over time, or change the way it looks over time. So I say if they're taking advantage of it, that means it's meaningful, it's worth it to them, and we can work with it from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And I think it's also important to add one more piece to this, which is even as adults, we engage in those escape behaviors. We go up and stand in the back of the room. We go use the restroom. We walk out the door and get a drink sometimes. And sometimes we don't do it because we have to use the restroom or get a drink or stand up. Sometimes we do it because we just need to make a change so that we can respond in a better way, even if things aren't in a highly escalated state. I'm going to make one more point and then we'll move to our resource for today. But the other thing that I always put out here is a lot of times the modeling is so key, even in those highly tense situations. I know there have been so many times where I'm sitting with a kid who's having a really difficult time, and I just will start breathing, just consciously breathing in front of them. And it's to Daria's, I think Daria used this word earlier, it's contagious. When somebody watches you breathe intentionally, they start to breathe more intentionally too. And so using those modeling skills, I think, can just be really, really effective. So go ahead, Daria.
Yes, Lena, I think that's a perfect point, because I think the top two things that I hope that our listeners can take away, if nothing else, is to stretch that pause, right, between the stimulus and their response, and to do this breathing together, because you're right. I think we can go no wrong if we are just taking a little bit of moment to kind of pause and try to bring everybody down, right? Like ourselves and the students. So yeah, I think that is brilliance right there.
Well, and the good news is breathing isn't going to hurt anybody. If they don't breathe with you, it doesn't hurt anything. If you don't maintain, I mean, you have to breathe, obviously, but like if you
And
don't
listen,
maintain,
sometimes in those moments you forget, right? Like, have you seen some of the kiddos who get so worked up that you really are like, oh my gosh, I really don't think you have taken a breath here for a second. So yeah, silly, like sounds really small, but in reality is so, so big. And there's so many great resources about breath work and the types of breathing and what they do and, all of this that I think it's important for us to just consider. But I will happily jump in
I
and
was going
share
to say that
today's
takes us
resource.
to our
Yes.
resource. So
Yes.
I'll turn it over to you.
So today's resource, Daniel, thank you so much for setting this up beautifully when you were talking about naming to tame it. So today's free resource is the mood meter. And Mood Meter is a tool that has been developed by Dr. Mark Brackett at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence in collaboration with Dr. Robin Stern. And essentially, it is a quadrant that puts the level of pleasantness on one axis and the level of energy on the second axis. So something can be high energy and terribly unpleasant, or high energy and very pleasant, like such when you get wonderful, terrific news, or something along those lines. So the model gives you the four quadrants. They are color coded in different primary colors, well, most of the primary colors, and it lists lots of different words to describe that emotion. So, for example, your high energy and high pleasantness may include words like excited, motivated, inspired, accelerated, and so on and so forth. And the idea of the tool is just to help people be able to identify and name what they are feeling, or at least identify kind of what quadrant they are feeling in as far as the pleasantness scales and the energy scale. And then once you identify where you are, then you can start thinking and reflecting about what do you need to do to kind of bring yourself to more of an equilibrium. And so there is University of New Hampshire has posted on their website that's free to access for everyone. And, they say that it is, the source is the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. This mood meter is just a PDF file. It's 2 pages. And I think it's a really, really helpful tool for teachers, whether you're using programs like zones of regulation in your classroom or not. It's a great tool to start helping build that fluency around that vocabulary of talking about emotions and naming them, because sometimes that's not a well-developed skills for many of us, students and adults alike. So I think it's a great tool. I think it has a ton of different applications. So if you have a moment, definitely check it out.
Thank you, Daria. And I think it is really good to think through, when we teach kids emotions, we teach some happy, sad, angry. But sometimes I'm not angry, but I'm not happy. And so where do I fall in between and how do I better label that? So I think it's a good tool. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And that brings us to the end of our episode today. So thank you, Daria.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Daniel.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
And Emily, thanks for keeping us on track as you always do.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us again. And we look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Education Insights Focus on Behavior. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can join the conversation by emailing us at cbis@odu.edu, visiting www.cbisva.org, or following us on Facebook, Instagram, X, or Blue Sky at CBISVA. Special thanks to the Virginia Department of Education for their support of this project.